welcome to another day in Paradox. Today I want to cover a topic that we've actually covered pretty extensively on the podcast, but I wanted to identify it again for any new viewers or listeners. And I wanted to specify a few things that maybe the conversation on the podcast didn't specify. And it's this idea that paradox can exist even within our understandings of individual terminology. The thing that separates, really, the humans from all the other mammals and the other species in the biological sphere, if you will. And it's not just opposable thumbs, but it's the ability to think abstractly, considering yourself as not just a creature who is alive, surviving now, but as a creature that has existed and that will exist, being able to consider yourself in the future. These abilities to abstract thought, or to abstractly think in general, provide for us this characterization of terminology that builds abstractions. And again, pulling from a literary background, abstract terms need to be made concrete. And the way that we do that in poetry and prose is that we build metaphors. We build metaphors to make abstract terms more concrete or more understandable for the reader. We want to build those images. When we say images, we're not just talking about visual things. We're talking about sensory perception, the ability to experience something in one of our five senses. And this is what metaphors allow for us to do. And this is kind of paradoxical because when we start dealing with terms perhaps that philosophy wants to make concrete, or even that other forms of science want to make concrete, we end up having the possibilities of paradox happening, that confliction, that contradiction. Truth is one of those terms. And obviously that term has all kinds of variations within an abstract space. We hear truth spoken of, obviously, from a scientific perspective, from an experiential or a perceptual perspective. We obviously have heard this in art, but we've also heard it in religion and other forms of spiritual experience. What is true, right? And one of the things that I think is really important is for us to sort of flesh out this term in one way, shape, or form, because in mental health treatment, particularly, when we're really dealing with our own personal psychology, when we're trying to solve problems of our own emotional experience and our own ability to rationalize our life in a way that is appropriate and comfortable and useful for us to pursue happiness and contentment, we are attempting to find some truth, right? Haven't we heard this term? This is my truth. I'm going to live my truth. I'm going to express my truth. And, I've often wondered, what do we mean by that when we say it? Well, one of the most important things about this term that I like to flesh out, and this is something that I'm actually borrowing from biological science, actually evolutionary biology. And I first heard this idea from Brett Weinstein on a podcast. And I thought of it as something profound because there's so many other aspects of our psychological interactions that deal with this sort of variation of truth, if you will. And even me saying that, I know, makes the scientist or the philosopher cringe. But the truth is that we don't live in as concrete of a world as sometimes these sorts of thinkers wish we did. And that concrete of a world perhaps is a utopian experience that maybe we can find, but it's not one that we all get to live in or that we're all living in readily. And so this idea of truth that is presented by evolutionary biology is metaphorical truth as compared to literal truth, right? Literal truth being that thing which is observable. It is objective, something that would fit very much within the context of the scientific method. Metaphorical truth is not that. The way it's defined in the simplest of terms is, even if something is not necessarily concretely true in any objective form, if an actor, okay, so a creature, particularly a human being or a group of human beings, acts and lives as though the idea is true, they live accordingly, their life is better, they're happier, they're more successful, whatever the framework of quote unquote good or better is in the context that is being practiced, a metaphorical truth would be something that, even if it's not literally true, would support achieving that success. Now, this variation of thought plays into so much of human history, particularly as it relates to the ideas that are put forth in religion, in spirituality, in literature, that so often sort of tease out that relationship between something akin to sacrifice and the maintenance of a quality of life in one way, shape, or form. I.e., if we're not willing to sacrifice, we're not willing to get a quality of life. This is counterintuitive if you think about it from a particularly survival perspective. But it's not counterintuitive if you think about it in the context of metaphorical truth. If I act as something that is true, some high moral good, some overseeing eye, some authority that is in the cosmos that is aiming me in the right direction, and my life is better as a result of it, then I am going to perpetuate that behavior throughout time. I'm going to teach my family, I'm going to teach my friends, I'm going to propagate that, if you will. And then it becomes a part of our biological function, right? And that's not to take away from the value, and it's certainly not to argue against the truth or for the truth of any particular spiritual or religious notions, or any historical context in which those notions were positive or negative in their presence. For every religion there is, you can find something being wonderfully done in the name of that religion and something being terribly done in the name of that religion. That's a paradox in and of itself. The idea is not to sort of tease out whether or not there's one or more of those that is right and wrong in any absolute sense, but it's to create this frame of metaphorical truth. This idea that if I apply what it is that I am learning in this context, does it make my life better? And sometimes I think that that's an aspect of religion and spirituality that's brought to the human psychological experience that might not be paid close enough attention to. The demand, interestingly enough, for religious types to find literal proof of whether or not God exists, or whether or not Noah's Ark is actually on the side of a mountain somewhere in Sinai, or whether or not some other historical figure that exists in an ancient text actually lived and how we can prove it, is ironically attempting to take the very nature of the religious experience, which is faith. And faith is actually something that represents a metaphorical truth. Faith is that acting out of something that we believe is true. And if we act as though it's true, our life is better and more supported and more successful, and we have better aims and goals and better relationships, etc. And so the pursuit of literal truth in the form of ancient text or something like that is ironically robbing us of the very thing that gives credence to the spiritual experience in the first place. And that is integrated into our biological success. There's something about the idea, as I'm explaining it at least, of metaphorical truth that is actually ingrained in the history and the success of human experience across time and culture. And that's fascinating in and of itself. And I guess the point that I want to make with that, the most important point is maybe some things aren't meant to be made so concrete that we can understand it to the most minute of details. It's great that we can, and it's great that there are literal truths and observable truths that we can find. Science has done wonders, but science did nothing that wasn't first at least hypothesized or investigated by artists and thinkers and writers and religious types that were pursuing some great and expansive mystery. And to the extent that we think science can make things concrete, there'll always be another mystery. And if we depend only on literal truth, then we're only going to be able to live in one fraction of the entire universe, because what is observable in the entire universe is a fraction of what is mysterious and unobservable. And it's metaphorical truth that allows us to live with at least one foot understanding the idea of concrete truth, but another foot reaching, walking, moving towards something that if we act as such, our lives are enriched, empowered, and we're better for it.